13 years of catastrophic mismanagement, fruitless expenditure, a spate of irregularities, botched tender processes, alleged favoritism and possible corruption. That, in a nutshell, sums up the state of the National Treasury's ambitious integrated financial management system project. After spending 8 long years and 1.2 billion rand, Treasury grudgingly admitted to having achieved very little. Cabinet had little choice but to approve a different solution for IFMS architecture, hoping that Treasury will better execute the project this time.
Treasury took another 3 years and another substantial chunk of taxpayers' money to what looked like getting the limping IFMS project off the ground. Oracle was awarded a massive software contract for the IFMS project last year. At first it looked like a job delayed, but finally well done. But whispers of corruption and nepotism surrounded the deal in no time.
Now, a few weeks ago, ANN7 exposed the gross financial mismanagement in the IFMS project, in which Treasury's own internal audit slammed goings-on at the Project Management Office during 2014-2015. And today, even the final awarding of the contract to Oracle is not free from irregularities. It is a shocking and sordid tale of alleged favoritism by the powers that be and at SETA and IFMS that literally handed out the software license contract to Oracle on a silver platter.
It's a blatant tale of possible tender rigging and a brazen disregard for processes that many suggest may not only further delay the project but also escalate costs. But because it is a complex web to understand, let's start from the beginning.
No sooner did Cabinet endorse changes to the IFMS solutions architecture in 2013, phones in SETA headquarters started ringing. For starters, it meant the cancellation of ongoing Phase 1 projects handed out to international software vendors, Oracle and SAP. At that time, the project had already cost more than 1.2 billion rands, and now a new tender was to be rolled out for the project. Two big international names, SAP and Oracle, both famous for their enterprise resource planning offerings, wanted to be in the race to bag the IFMS contract. Once the tender was issued, SAP submitted a bid along with a consortium of local service providers before the closing date of April 23, 2014, but Oracle did not. SAP partnered with local implementation partners and submitted a bid. Industry sources suggest to ANN7 that Oracle did not bid as they objected to SAP tying up with local partners, placing them at a disadvantage for lack of an ecosystem for delivery in South Africa. In November 2014, just days before the bid for IFMS software and services was to be awarded, SETA strangely cancelled the tender, issuing a new one and stunning bidders. What heightened suspicion about the new tender is that it was limited to software. Industry players and small companies who bid for the first RFP saw red. At least 3 sources have confirmed to ANN7 that the new RFP was designed specifically to allow Oracle back into the fray and in a favorable position. Here's a look at how the new tender allegedly worked in Oracle's favor, a company that had completely refrained from bidding in the first procurement process. Here's a look at how the new tender allegedly worked in Oracle's favor. SETA's rationale for bid changes was that it will include potential bidders who did not submit before the closing date. Industry says that if parties did not respond in time, they may not be committed enough to deliver on project. Oracle, which did not bid in the first process, could bid in the second tender. Secondly, SETA argued that the bid change was due to non-compliance of legislature and compromise of integrity. Industry objects, saying that there is no basis to say that integrity of 2013 tender was compromised, and also that timeline difficulty does not constitute a compliance problem. Essentially, Oracle was allowed to sneak in through the back door as it qualified on the basis of showing interest in Tender 1. SETA started a new IFMS procurement process by floating a fresh tender in late 2014. Industry objected, saying that it feared that the 2013 bid prices were leaked to competitors. Oracle could have tweaked its bid if it was privy to competitors' bid prices in Tender 1. Lastly, Tender 2 was for software only. Services such as customization, implementation were left out. Industry had 3 objections. 1, that the change was senseless as software cost is only a small component of an entire IFMS lifecycle. 2, additional costs for services may be added later, resulting in unquantified cost escalation. And 3, this completely blocked local SMMEs as it made software ownership necessary. It was great for Oracle, though, as the company got a foot in the door despite not having a service footprint in SA through local partners. Several experts suggest that nobody has a measure of the cost escalation this project and the award to Oracle may bring. They suspect that the cost overruns may be in billions.
What has happened is that you've basically purchased the components of a motor car. Now you're expecting someone else to come in and start putting it all together. We believe that the software authors have the intellectual capital of their own product. So they should basically be pioneering and spearheading from a project management point of view the implementation cycles of these type of systems.
It is not just possible bid manipulation and corruption that is worrying. AN7 learned that several small players who were excluded from the second bid suffered major financial losses.
A lot of technological resources are required to put together complex responses that is required in these type of systems. They're not simple off-the-shelf products like a Microsoft Word that you just install, plug and play. That doesn't take a lot of effort. However, when small players have to draft in these experts, that needs to be paid for, and then they are hoping to recoup that through the awarding of the tender. However, when a tender is simply cancelled for no specific criteria, that money is lost and is unrecoverable, which is why a lot of the smaller players do end up going out of business.
AN7 has in its possession letters from at least 2 bidders in the process who wrote to SETA and the then Treasury General complaining about the botched up tender process and alleged corruption. But their pleas fell on deaf ears.
On the face of it, the IFMS project and tender, it is a colossal fraud of monumental proportions. It is clearly astonishing that we could have National Treasury knowing what it knew in terms of the internal audit report, that the project management office had failed to achieve its objectives, that they could then go on to go and procure the system from Oracle, as we now know, in an instance whereby it is clear that they could neither define or describe what they wanted to procure, and hence the risk of cost overruns that will be into billions and billions of rands in years to come. And clearly this contract, I just cannot see how it will stand in a court of law. I think when reviewed, it stands to be set aside.
Oracle bagged the lucrative $461 million contract in August 2016 when Pravin Gordhan ruled the National Treasury, arguably with an iron fist. And what makes the whole process even murkier is the fact that the then Chief Director of IFMS, Herman Bula, now sits in Oracle SA's Johannesburg office in a senior management position. Oracle pocketed the tender in August 2016, and 3 months later, Herman Bula happily strolled into Oracle. When ANN7 spoke to Mr. Herman Bula, now Technology Sales Consulting Director at Oracle, to get his response on the alleged irregularities and his own conflict of interest, he denied any involvement in the IFMS bidding process or the awarding of the contract to Oracle. This is despite his role as Chief Director of IFMS. In fact, Mr. Bula refused to answer any queries and directed the ANN7 team to National Treasury for answers. This is the same Mr. Bula who was tasked with securing action on the internal audit report of the National Treasury, which ANN7 exposed in May. He, along with senior IFMS officer Linda Budavich and others, were aware of the wrongdoings in the project, according to the auditors who reviewed the financial mess at IFMS between March 2014 and August 2015. Even before the contract was awarded to Oracle in August 2016, at least one bidder wrote a letter to the then Treasury DG, Lungisa Fuzile, complaining of a serious breach of governance surrounding the conditional award of the IFMS tender, but got no response. A few days later, a second letter was sent by the same bidder to Fuzile, but repeated requests for meetings were met by a stoic silence from National Treasury. The award of the IFMS contract to Oracle is clearly shrouded in many controversies, including a clear conflict of interest of at least one person from CETA who switched sides to Oracle even before the ink on the contract was dry. The question is, why did the then bosses of Treasury turn a blind eye to the goings-on despite being alerted after the fact? An even bigger question, will Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba follow up on these allegations and probe a larger investigation into the alleged irregularities and favoritism at display in the entire process?
And joining us for this discussion, Adil Chabeling, President of Transform RSA, Carl Niehaus, a former spokesperson for Nelson Mandela, via Skype, Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, Cecilia Russell, Special Projects Editor at ANN7, and Gilbert Parsons, CEO of iAdapt.
Well, we'll chat to our guest in just a minute, but first let's cut across to Audrey Chimwanda. She'll take us through 7 telltale signs.
Well, thank you, guys. Now taking a look at if Treasury and CETA is playing favorites. Well, we have 7 telltale signs. Let's take a look at them, shall we? Tender number 1 that required software and services was cancelled to accommodate Oracle, which did not submit a bid. Also, another point there, tender number 2 was issued for software license, only giving Oracle an advantage. Point number 3, software only tender floated despite the risk of project cost escalation. We have another pointer coming through there, suspicion that competitors' bid details were leaked to Oracle, giving them an advantage in the bidding process. Pointer number 5, bidder scores from tender evaluation process allegedly leaked to industry insiders. Also point number 6, according to the documents that ANN7 has in possession, conflict of interest as then IFMS Chief Director joins Oracle's senior management barely 90 days after the award of the contract. Also, sources to ANN7 revealed that at least one bidder wrote twice to then Treasury DG, that's Lungisa Fuzile, to alert him of serious breach of governance in the award, but he got no response. Back to you guys.
And this is the most ambitious part of this IFMS project, aimed at bringing all the disparate elements of the project together under one roof, so to speak. Yet it too is now mired in controversy. And just to put it on record, when we approached Oracle for some answers, they said, and I quote, "Thanks for reaching out. We have no comments to share on this matter," end quote.
So a service provider which did not tender for IFMS project, Tsepo, on the face of it, this Oracle contract looks like it's not above board.
You know, this is probably one of the saddest periods in our country. The saddest periods in that the department, which is National Treasury, which for years the mainstream media was very happy to convey to the nation the news that this was a department which effectively was the paragon of all things desired for a constitutional democracy such as ours. And now for us to find from the facts as established that if anything, this is an institution or a ministry which effectively is, is the center of colossal corruption. It is dismaying beyond, just to say the least. And I'm wondering as to what Minister Malusi Gigaba, now that he has been on the job for well over 75 days, as to what his views are now, because he has taken a great deal of time to tell all of us that everything else was above board, that in fact this was a center of excellence, and now we know the opposite. And he has shown no appetite whatsoever to demolish this institution of colossal corruption. And the question that now we have to be asking, well, is he really the right man for the job, taking into account his reluctance or seeming refusal to really deal with what is otherwise monumental corruption that at all corners we should have been fighting?
All right, Cecilia, just give us the meat of the story, how ANN7 stumbled on this particular investigation, and particularly how Oracle, if they did not participate in the initial round of the bidding process, how they were successful the second time around.
Well, we stumbled, so-called stumbled upon the story when we were doing the other expose on IFMS and their office that was set up, and there were huge numbers of irregularities in various processes there. And as we did that, people approached us and said, but this is the beginning of the story, not the end of the story. And so this is the beginning of the end of the story, if you understand what I mean. So we picked up the Oracle story from there. We had always known that there had been an issue around Oracle. It had been indicated to us a little bit, but this was able to give us a bit of a bit more meat onto the story. The letters, for example, from the failed bidders who were clearly unhappy with the second bid. The fact that there was a first bid which seemingly seemed as though it was fine, but Oracle was excluded. Suddenly, in the second bid, it's arranged and Oracle is included, so the original bidders are unhappy. At the moment, there's no legal challenge to it, but that doesn't mean to say there won't be in the future.
And Gilbert, you, the managing director of iAdapt, and had participated in the so-called tenderpreneurship space. Is this an indication of how processes are flouted in favor of a particular company? Mind you, some might say you are disgruntled because you failed to succeed in certain tender processes. What is your view in terms of what goes on in the tender process?
Well, first of all, to go back to the beginning of tenders, the idea of the tender is to basically go out, look in the market for what is the best solution for that particular job. And what we're finding is that that process is actually not being fulfilled to the best of their abilities. What we were trying to get to in IFMS version 1 or iteration 1, where we went up against SAP specifically for the HR and payroll, South African owned what we call OSMs, original software manufacturers, were specifically excluded. And it came down to basically it'll only be international players that would be actually allowed to participate. Which eventually we thought to ourselves, well, what is the purpose of us spending millions of rands in R&D trying to build a better infrastructure for young black graduates who can take ownership of IP and make them grow? And what we're doing now is we're taking the intellectual capital and shifting it offshore, or the dollars offshore. Everything is going offshore. What are we left with?
Well, I'm not sure about litigation, but I mean, this is an enormously expensive. This is 400,000, more than 400,000 for a 3-year contract. Just 400 million. I beg your pardon. 461. For 461 for a 3-year contract. It's only the software. It doesn't include anything additional services. People are going to be trained. Somebody's going to have to come in and manage the software, where there's adaptations for South African peculiarities. They will have to bring that in, etc., etc. It seems like this is not very well thought through.
Should there be and will there be litigation?
Look, at this stage, I mean, from Transform RSA's perspective, the market, especially the suppliers of similar software technology, are quite disgruntled. So I don't see any reason why, bodies and individuals and organizations cannot take on this matter and actually litigate against government for the unfair process of actually appointing Oracle as a single provider, overlooking the majority of other massive suppliers in South Africa who have extreme expertise and have established themselves for years. If you recall, this process itself has been going on for years, up to the appointment of Oracle. The first bidders who were original software manufacturers in South Africa, who were excluded in the first tranche, were done deliberately. The second process was just mainly to appoint one service provider, and in this case an international foreign company, which is going to use South Africa's financial information and government information and integrity and house it somewhere outside this country, which is a huge breach of our own sovereign security and intelligence to come on with. So we are undermining our own entrepreneurs in South Africa. We are saying there's no capacity to articulate in terms of what should be done, yet we have massive amount of companies. I am part of those people who actually belong to the software industry. We have been participating in this process and have been excluded. So from a transformer as a perspective and point of view, it is a matter that needs to be interrogated. You cannot take 4 billion and give it to one single entity, and actually that amount will be increasing over the amount of years. Remember, software, you pay on usage. You're not just paying an upfront fee. There is a huge amount of it. There is a huge amount of consultancy that's going to go on forward. There's a lot of amount of training as well as an implementation, integration, back and forward, data capturing, and all of those things comprise of what we're talking about. Why are those jobs not created in South Africa? Why are those companies South African companies? That's why we're having an issue with. And I think there has to be a civil matter around this issue.
Yeah. It's either there's a clear cover-up or there is just a lack of interest in going through this particular matter.
Look, there can't be lack of interest. In fact, anybody who is a Minister of Finance, as we have now, they are duty-bound to have to take action on this because it has now been proved. There can be nobody anywhere who can deny the level of irregularities in how this whole contract and the procurement was handled. And also, there can be nobody who can deny the fact that here we have a foreign multinational that was favored over indigenous companies that could have well participated.
So our sources in the industry have shared with ANN7 that the award of the contract to Oracle in its present form exposes the National Treasury and the entire IFMS project to major risks. My colleague Audrey Chimwanda has more.
Oh, thank you, guys. Now, taking a look, if only the software contract was suspicious. Well, the industry sources to ANN7 have revealed the following to us, that the total IFMS lifecycle cost cannot be quantified with software-only contract. Not only that, they go on to tell us that it does not include customization, implementation, a change management, and other ICT project costs. We also have found out from our industry sources that it does not take into account what departments, that's the national and the provincial, have already put into practice. And all of the above likely to result in fruitless and wasteful expenditure costs on the IFMS project.
All right, that's our colleague Audrey Chimwanda unpacking the contract to Oracle. And we understand that Oracle essentially were providing a license, but this in itself poses management issues, as you were saying earlier, Tepo, the dependency now continuously on Oracle. Gilbert, just explain to us how this then fleeces money unnecessarily out of the country.
Well, if you come back to my original discussion, essentially, Oracle is a manufacturer. They essentially sit there, they write code, they got R&D teams, and they issue you with a piece of paper that says, pay me the 400 million for the product. Out of that license, they have what they call a support and maintenance component, which is ongoing. It's ad infinitum. So it actually exposes, as Tsepo quite rightly said, the Treasury to quite a lot of risk in terms of escalating rand-dollar costs that are not recoupable. That money is just basically gone. Then the second part to that is now the professional services that gets attached to try and make this work. Now, if you go back to history stats in terms of IT, I've been in the industry for 30-odd years. Again, for every $1 you're spending, somebody, another team has to try and spend 10 times that to make that work. And because there's no defined set of specifications from Treasury for exactly each and every component that was required, that goalpost can move exponentially. So if they're saying that they're setting aside as a budget, I think it was 400 million you're talking about for licenses. You times that by 10 for the services. That could be just the beginning of the iceberg. There could be so much more because it's not defined. So that ROI will never be able to be calculated. Sorry.
Yeah, I think maybe one must understand the software industry bases its pricing on acquisition. When you acquire a piece of software or a license or a database or an engine that is going to operate, you first pay an upfront fee. So that upfront fee payment, which is really the acquisition of the product, before they even bring it and launch it onto your systems, you have to pay an amount of money. Okay. So that amount of money was to acquire the rights to operate and use Oracle, for instance, as a software and an application. So that is why it was the upfront fee. We're not talking about the services. We're not talking about the maintenances. We're not talking about the implementation. We're not talking about database. We're not talking about the consultants. There's a multiple layers involved in terms of organizing a particular project of this nature. And again, coming back to the essence of what IFMS is all about. Integrated Financial Management System is a system that is used by various governments, by various entities, by various organizations. What it then does, you have a piece of software that operates the entire government spending, budget, payments, acquisitions of contracts. It will operate the entire state in terms of its procurement.
Carl Niehaus, I hope second time lucky with you in how this whole process, as noble as it sounded, to have a desktop approach in government affairs and tracking projects and money, etc., has essentially fell flat, and there's monies that have now gone unaccounted for. How do we then get ensure accountability where various ministers have clearly just turned a blind eye?
Well, I think what we see with this second part of the expose is a confirmation of what we also saw when we discussed the first part before, that there are no proper processes in place, that the decisions that are being taken, I believe, are influenced in a manner that are not technical, that are not there to serve the best interests of government. And as we have just said to each other, the IFMS system is critical for government to perform properly. And what we had seen here is a whole tender process which in essence was deeply faulty, and therefore we cannot expect that the product that will eventually be delivered will serve government and especially Treasury. Now, what concerns me deeply is that this particular part of the tender that we speak about went to Oracle, while other smaller and black-empowered companies were clearly disadvantaged. And that the concerns that those companies expressed about this process was simply just thrown into the wind. So I don't understand how our former Minister of Finance and his deputy allowed this process to proceed, because I understand that it happened under their watch, and they will have to answer what has happened here, because the process itself is faulty, and therefore the result in terms of the product and how that product will work to serve government, and as quite correctly being said, Treasury is the engine room of financial services of government. If it goes wrong there, it seems to escalate like dominoes falling right through all the other departments. We've got a very serious problem here, not just in terms of service delivery, but in terms of the whole process in which this tender was allocated. And that cannot happen within Treasury, because Treasury should be the heart of a process that is going to be correctly managed, and Treasury should set the example for all other government departments. Clearly in this instance, and in all the other instances that we've discussed over the past couple of programs that we had, this has not happened, and it is a serious indictment on how Minister Gordon and his deputy and his predecessors managed Treasury and how the senior officials in Treasury handled the situation. And clearly it was at the disadvantage of smaller and black companies, which in terms of our own government policies should be the companies and the people who should get priority and should be advantaged, but here they are disadvantaged.
All right, Cecilia, talk us through how executives within the integrated financial management system somehow ended up with the bidding company that won the tender. Yes. You know, in that process of negotiating, clearly there's a conflict of interest.
Well, yes, we did phone him, and he did say that he felt that there was no conflict of interest because he didn't adjudicate the tender. But adjudication doesn't start with the person that, you know, ticks off the forms and says yes or no. The whole process of this, he would have designed what was needed, you know, the specifications for it. He would have come up with the parameters for the tender, etc., etc. So he would have been setting up a whole range of things for the tender, for the companies that are tendering. There's no ways that you can say, you know, I had no conflict of interest because I didn't adjudicate when you are managing the tender. And then a few weeks later is found, you know, having now, you know, in the board of Oracle in South Africa. It does seem to be very curious.
How, you know, the tricks and theatrics of getting the tenders are done, Gilbert. Won't you share?
It's just, you know, just expanding on what Cecilia was saying. I find it very odd that if you're the architect of a brand new building that's going up, and 3 weeks later you actually become the head of the building company, and they say it's not a conflict of interest, I find that rather actually odd. And the other thing, just, I know it's detracting a little bit, but coming back to the whole black empowerment thing, I find it a bitter pill to swallow, because we've tried everything in our power to try and grow our BEE content in our company. And all that's ever happened is that the bigger players have always said it's easier to sell the international products because they don't have to conform to the exact same standards. So now you've got, again, a parallel set of rules for everybody that's in the playing field. So that doesn't make sense to me either.
Yeah, but let's just talk also about the proportional loss to Treasury, because this financial system is supposed to go on go live in 2022, and already there's been money spent and no work essentially done. So how much more can we expect Treasury to hemorrhage?
The same National Treasury that was telling us that, another company by the name of Tegeta was given a loan, in fact, for the coal that it already supplied, and they say, well, that loan must now be repaid. Here they have now factually given a loan, upfront payment, and that the money we don't know whether or not will ever be. So what they need to do is to recoup the money. The contract stands to be cancelled. But on the issues of conflict of interest, we should not be surprised. This is customary out of National Treasury. We saw one Trevor Manuel, who presided over the greatest corporate exodus from this country, of companies that today could have been on the global Fortune 500, that after he presided and approved of their externalization, where they are no longer South African, he's now sitting on the boards of some of those companies, be it SA Breweries, be it Old Mutual. He's now even an advisor to Rothschilds, which is run by somebody who, in fact, was the architect of the demise of the rand in 2001. We saw Ntanta Nene. He was chairman of PIC. He's now left. He's with Alan Gray. And Alan Gray manages billions and billions of rands from PIC. And again, they said, no, there is no conflict of interest. There was absolutely no explanation. So we should not be surprised by seeing what Mr. Bula has now done by just moving across into Oracle, because after all, this is what was customary for all the people who led at National Treasury. But that is despicable conduct, which we should not just frown upon it, but action should be taken to stop such conduct. So, I mean, we are in real trouble. This is, if anything, Minister Gigaba, be aware. This is Houston. We have a problem.
Okay, let's bring in Audrey now. The FMS project has indeed been mired in one controversy after another, but more than anything else, the mismanagement of finances. Here's Audrey to take us through the saga of fruitless expenditure that just seems to be continuing.
Well, thank you very much once again, guys. Taking a look look at IFMS fruitless expenditure, we continue with the pointers that we have for you today. Taxpayers' money down the drain. We take a look at an amount of 1.2 billion rand spent on IFMS 1.0. This was pre-2013, the proposed architecture of which was changed due to technological challenges and delays. Also now taking a look at the 4.3 billion rand that ANN7 initially exposed. Treasury's internal audit report revealed forensic evidence about the mismanagement of IFMS millions between the year 2014 and 2015. Not only that, we take a look now at 461 million rand allegedly paid to Oracle as a software license fee in May of 2016 for a financial management system that will only take off in 2022. Again, millions more that could have potentially been wasted, likely to be dished out between now and the year 2022 to ensure servicing of the software, that is customization and implementation, etc. Back to you guys.
Carl, maybe you can try and make sense of this. Why so much money is being invested in imported technology when we have the capacity to grow our own, and clearly Treasury and the state information technology agencies guilty of fruitless expenditure and wasting taxpayers' money? Let's just take that back in studio. I believe we've lost Carl. Adil, you can talk us through this. Is this a deliberate cronyism, if you like, of people setting their friends up and just enjoying the hard-earned taxpayers' money?
If you recall, this is a global practice. Most actually professionals use the state to establish processes by which they can empower themselves and then exit out of the state and go into the private sector to harvest those opportunities. It's called a revolving door model. So they go back into the state and then go back into private sectors, and then using insider information on what is going on in the state and then taking it into the private sector and vice versa. In this case, it is a huge disadvantage. One is when we start losing people who are software developers as well as software manufacturers and engineers, we are losing the highest level of our, in terms of human, development index in South Africa. A lot of white companies, forget black empowerment on this aspect, a lot of white companies are established in the software industry. Most of them are now complaining that they are exiting this market. They are going over to Australia, they are going over to New Zealand, they are going over to the US, they are going over to UK and Dubai, because the South African market has not accommodated them. All right? As Transformers say, we're asking ourselves a question. We're saying that we're moving together as a one nation and as a one people, but at the same time, we want to push for radical economic transformation. Yet, you're taking away the same component, which is critical, which is about radical economic transformation. You're taking them out of the sector and you're actually disadvantaging them in terms of being levers for us to radically economically transform this society and sector particularly. Software industry cannot just be a thing whereby you buy a license off a shelf and that is it. No, it creates massive amounts of jobs. Yes. It creates massive amounts of opportunities. Absolutely. And if that money is retained within South Africa, within South African-owned companies, white and black, by the way, yes, owned software IT companies, we would do a huge difference. But players in the state who are using these opportunities for personal interest and gain, we know Treasury has had massive problems for years. It is just unfortunate nobody wanted to tackle the issue relating to the way Treasury goes about in attending to procurement and how it favors itself.
Yeah, but what's the hope for local IT players, especially if we're trying to develop or empower local industry? You know, what is the point if we then Treasury is going to award all these lucrative tenders to multinationals or foreign multinationals?
It's very difficult, and a lot of the small players that I know of, that I deal with literally on a daily basis, have thrown the towel in because, as Ndili quite rightly says, the objective is to actually try and grow our skills base, try and grow our BE guys who've been not given opportunities in life. Why can't they have ownership of IP? Why can't they benefit? But no, we're taking all their money and just sending it off offshore each and every time. When that license gets issued, 80% of that money has gone offshore. Yes, Oracle and SAP retain money for their offices here. But believe me, when royalties and licenses are paid, that money has to go offshore to to pay for those licenses.
So it's double dipping, because now we're paying them to set office here and create employment, but essentially the bulk of it is exported or remittance sent to their own countries.
Exactly, in the form of license fees.
Cecilia,
and that's the sad part.
If the 461 million has already been paid and we don't know what we got for it, and the system hasn't gone live yet, we're supposed to be seeing that operational in 2022, how much is this going to cost? Because then there's a cost involved there.
Times 10.
Times 10.
Somebody else has answered the question, because goodness knows, I don't know. I mean, we know, we don't know very much about this. We know that there was a tender, that it was awarded, and we know that in order to award the tender as well, there was probably some a deal that was done to get one of the other companies to not complain too loudly, because there are crossovers in all of these different big companies. But it is going to cost a fortune. But I think the cost can't just be measured in rands. You know, it has to be measured in terms of this IFMS project is designed to make sure that, I mean, if it worked, and in my mind I have an idea that, you know, that procurement is done in one place, people, you know, people wanting to sell their goods and services to government have to only register once, that a tight lid is kept on expenditure, that somebody who's applied for a house in the Northwest can't apply for a house again. So all of these things would benefit government, benefit taxpayers, etc., etc. But the way that these projects are being managed at Treasury doesn't give us that sense of comfort.
Would we be able to prove illegality, or is it more a case of unethical or immoral practice, Tsepo?
No, the project is illegal. I think we know now as a matter of course that one of the bidders that were told that they were unsuccessful, who wrote 2 letters, by the way, to the former Director General of Treasury, who bothered not to respond or give an answer. And legally, no response is a response. In any case, he bothered not to answer. So, and when he did finally send a letter to say, look, you've been successful, we know as a matter of course that the law firm that represents one of the so-called losing bidders did take issue and raised very legally fundamental question marks on the manner in which they had conducted themselves as Treasury, and highlighted to Treasury that, by the way, any attempt to implement this project would be unlawful. Now, it beggars belief on how Minister Pravin Gordhan, his deputy, together with the DG, then proceeded, armed with a letter that they were armed with from a law firm. They proceeded to believe that they can even go and pay 461 million rand, when ordinarily should have occurred to them that, hey, they have hit turbulence, and this turbulence was actually going to bring them down. Now, how did they, with a straight face, look South Africans in the eye at all material times and plead that they were being victimized from doing the important job within National Treasury? Knowing what they knew, why did they conceal all these fatal decisions that they had taken, very fatal to the economy of this country, very fatal to the financial well-being of the state, when they were the people who were the custodians of ensuring that we got efficiency, we got appropriate spending, and at the end of the day we can make sure that this government can deliver services to all. And yet, sitting with all of that information, they chose to do absolutely nothing. If anything, they chose to take decisions that have imperiled this country further. How can it be that even to this day, Minister Gordhan continues to maintain that he was unduly removed from that position, when in fact he should be accounting for what he has done here? We cannot sit here and have hundreds of billions of rands that have been spent by National Treasury, not just in IFMS, but in a number of other areas, and there can be no accountability. It will appear that all things are acceptable. What manner of a country is that? And the question is, what will Minister Malusi do? What will President Zuma do? Because President Zuma by now ordinarily should be knowing all the facts that we now know. If anything, he should have been having access to the entire, he should be having a full view of what really has gone on at Treasury, and it stinks what has gone on at Treasury. What is he going to do about it? The buck stops with him. He is the president. He's the one who took oath of office. And therefore, having taken that oath of office, he is now duty-bound to act. And if his minister is not able to do anything, he then has to go and answer to the South Africans that, well, what is he going to do if his Minister Malusi Gigaba, can continue to tell us that everything is above board? It is not above board. Let us not be in denial, because else we'll be accused of thinking that denial is just a river in Egypt.
How do you stop this conflict of interest if you have a gentleman like Herman Pula, who was chief director with the IFMS project, and then 3 months later he ends up with Oracle? It's not illegal, but you can see with clear eyes what is going on there.
Well, there's a simple practice in corporates. There is a cooling off period by which you cannot entertain or enter into a space which is in conflict with your job. So we don't have to really innovate or come up with measures by which state officials, public officials can actually be held responsible. I cannot expect a minister, a president, or a public official at a high office or a DG coming out of the same department that he has just left yesterday, entering into a sector of a similar interest. That is called conflict of interest already, because what are you going to do? You're going to trade state information. That's the only currency you have, the contacts, the networks, the access, and all of the other things that you know that others do not know. So in this case, we don't have to go too far. Certain things have already been flawed in this whole process. If you find state employees already jumping ship and joining a competing public sector interest, it tells you very clearly there has already been insider lobbying, there's already been access in terms of information, they've already been feeding, for that matter, on the other side, particular information that comes out of, to a point where they could even tell a competitor how to price, when to price, what to put in terms of quantity, because they sit together drafting the technical terms. So us on the other side, for instance, as enterprise as well as business, when we are actually going through the tender phase and process, when we respond to a procurement or a tender, we are blind. Whereas state officials already have a technical spec in place, they already know who they have preferred, by the way, before they even release it. So it is actually, it's a prejudice on business. So from a point of view as transformers, we're saying these practices cannot continue to actually linger. You have, for instance, in this situation, you have CSIR. Why did they not go to CSIR and ask them that, look, we're looking for a package which actually can be used, or a technology resolution? Who among the South African competitors is there an availability of IP, intellectual property, from a software point of view that has been developed? You would find that CSIR is sitting with chunks and chunks of this particular software that has not even been commercialized and has failed to actually enter into the market. So that's the level of wastage, that's the level of irresponsibility. You have the Minister of Science and Technology, who's supposed to be responsible in this case as well. What has science and technology done? You have all of these agencies that are being given money for innovation, technology, software, everything that encompasses this particular space and spectrum. But no one has ever been taken into responsibility. So if we are serious, President Zuma, either he is highly ill-informed by the advisors around him, and they are misleading him on many of the issues. And the new minister right now, who I don't have hope that Malusi is going to make much of a difference in recalling this process, because he's already taking a far much more softer steps towards addressing the issues that are sitting within Treasury right now, the crisis that is sitting within Treasury. We are talking about radical economic transformation, and that radical economic transformation is not going to happen until we see bold steps taken to address these issues, the recalling of certain things, the decisiveness on dealing with particular practices, and a minister who's not going to be every day answering onto allegations and rumors and gossips. His focus should be based on the work at hand. We don't care about what gossips are going out there. We want to know, how are the South African people going to be given the opportunities that they need?
Yeah.
Radical economic transformation is critical, and that socio-economic transformation of it is particularly dependent on the amount of money that the state must make available and the partners available.
Yeah. Temple, would you say that the chaos is perpetuated in Treasury to allow exactly the rot, or rather the fleecing of contract and taxpayers' money?
Well, the system of corruption has been perfected. What we have now, effectively, we have a minister who wants to actually enshrine this corrupt institution called National Treasury. Unless they remedy very decisively the issues that we have raised here, Unfortunately, they will only be confirming that we are sitting here with a prodigiously corrupt institution called National Treasury. Now, with CETA as well, I just don't know why on earth we still have them still open for business. They should just close shop, because for me, they are now a CETA-INO, State Information Technology Agency, in name only. You have got a lot of people that would appear that they are unemployed, but they are on the payroll of CETA. So why is the, how can it be that an organization that by their own IFMS, an agency that spent 1.3 billion rand and went to Parliament and said, sorry, we made a mistake, we'll learn next time. And they were very sanguine about it. And nobody's horrified that how can you go and take 1.3 billion rand, effectively just throw it into, you know, down the drain, and nobody is concerned about that. Have we become so acceptable of all things that are wrong that we don't even see, and in fact we focus on things that really absolutely cannot make a fundamental change on this country being at the top of economic scales. The things that are impeding our ability to be able to be efficient, to be economically competitive, to ensure that we can do more with the less resources that we have. What does Mwalimu Julius Nyerere said when in 1997 to the Parliament of South Africa? He said, well, you know, even with your per capita income, you are poor. So we are poor, therefore we must act like people who are poor. But here what we are seeing, wasteful expenditure, unprecedented. And there's absolutely no attempt to cap it. And we are behaving as though that we are a rich country, when in actual fact we are a poor country. So somebody somewhere has to take action. What will the law enforcement agencies do, by the way, with the information that has now been exposed to them? They are duty bound to have to investigate. Why on earth have we not had anything from the police? Why has the Minister of Police not said a word about such economic crime, and that is being left to just continue and, you know, without any restraint?
Can I maybe just add to that? Just one question that Treasury should sit back and actually ask themselves. The vacuum of 3 billion rand that's of cash that's disappeared and gone, what would that have done in terms of radical economic transformation? What would that have invested in and bought and built? But they got nothing to show for it. They do not have, they got pieces of paper that says, here's licenses, 2 failed projects already, being the original IFMS part 1 and 2, now this is iteration 3, and now you're going into 3 billion rand worth of cash, evaporated. Somebody must answer that question.
Well, Carl Niehaus, if you're still with us, you know, we've talked about this project. We know that it's cost a lot of money, and if we're going to restart, and it was delayed before, if we're going to restart, it's going to cost even more.
Yes, I'm still here. I'm now on the telephone. You see, my concern is I understand that Minister Gigaba had inherited all this rot in Treasury. But the time has come, he's been there for a while now, for the minister to start showing his backbone. He has to start taking action. He said there would be a forensic audit, but we don't hear any further steps being taken at this stage. The time has come for the minister to start taking strong and decisive action. We know that within Treasury there seems to be a history where ministers tend to get captured by white monopoly capital. We sincerely do not want to see Minister Gigaba going the same route, but if that is not going to happen, he will have to start taking corrective measures very urgent. I'm concerned that just in the last while we heard the minister now expressing concerns about the new decisions that have been taken by Minister Zwane in terms of the mines, and he again seems to express views that do not go along with radical economic transformation as we all hope it would be implemented. So the call that I would like to make to Minister Gigaba is, please work for radical economic transformation. Do not allow yourself to be captured by white monopoly capital. And please do not act as quickly as you've done with regards to the new mining charter and other matters where you criticized it, when those particular steps and also the kind of Concerns that we express at this point about what has happened in Treasury need to be addressed by you. We have been hoping, with the appointment of Minister Gigaba by President Zuma, that we would now have someone who would act decisively for radical economic transformation. He has to prove his mettle if he's going to do that, and I sincerely hope, and I repeat this again, that he will not become yet another captive of white monopoly capital.
Carl Niehaus joining us on the phone from PE. Just a final word from you, Andile. How do we untangle this without it costing a bomb?
Look, the minister has all the powers in his capacity. The president has the powers in his capacity to revoke or recall this particular contract and make it come back home. We need it for our own programs, as radical economic transformation has been mentioned. It is imperative for us. So as a result, we cannot have Minister Malusi Gigaba wasting enough state time trying to undo everything else that everybody has done. He needs to be decisive upon the program which we've already outlined. This particular contract is not going to benefit South Africa. It must be recalled, and this particular opportunity must be given to South African white and black companies owned jointly around the radical economic transformation program, and we can have a proper, true, not even a broad-based black economic empowerment. Here we're talking about black people and white people in South Africa working together to untangle this particular economy, because if we are going to take this project and take it overseas and give it to international players and make sure that our intelligence, financial intelligence, government operation, every ID you have, every procurement you have, whatever financial intelligence information that you're producing and giving to the government is already shared internationally by other organs wherever. So you don't want that integrity, issue to come up. So we are calling very clearly to say to the minister himself, there has been an error in particularly with regards to this particular project. There are South African players. From Transform RSA point of view, we can tell you who participates in this space across the board. We understand the sectors, we understand the players, and right now most players in this sector are extremely angry and perturbed.
Yeah,
and the blame falls onto the president.
Sorry, Adil, how do you channel that anger and frustration in an environment that has obviously been very conducive for established business multi-conglomerates as well, so that we are not the only lone voice that speaks out about these things, but can effect change that will benefit the majority of black business?
Wonderful. This is an opportunity that will benefit the majority black businesses, as well as the existing software developers, manufacturers, as well as innovation companies in South Africa. So the current frustration is with the department that has made the decision to procure and bring on board on a, not even a preferable basis, not even a preferential, on a dubious basis. This, if you understand how Oracle was appointed to take on this particular contract, it was not even a question of whether they are going to participate or not. It was an instruction, by the way. And SITA was instructed to say, we are going with Oracle. They didn't have much of an input into that whole process, by the way. So if these are some of the challenges that we are sitting with in South Africa. So President Zuma has appointed Malusi Gigaba as a Minister of Treasury, with the hope that Malusi will be bringing about changes that the country is long waiting for. If he's not going to do it, and if he's conflicted as a minister, Malusi Gigaba, he must just wash his hands off and say, guys, I've got a crisis here because my conflicts are coming in to call in for favors, and in this case, I cannot do anything, so I'm going to recuse myself. Find yourself a better finance as well as the treasury minister in this case. That is what we are saying.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks indeed. Of course, there'll be more information and details that we'll share with you on this expose regarding how tenders were awarded in Treasury, specifically in the period March 2014 to August 2015. The players that are benefiting from these lucrative tenders as well. Our esteemed panelists, Adil and Chabeleng is the president of Transform RSA, and we had Carl Niehaus, former spokesperson for President Nelson Mandela, on the phone. Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, Cecilia Russell, special projects editor, and Gilbert Parsons, managing director of iAdapt. And thanks indeed for you at home for watching as well. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.